Welcome back to Midnight Pasta. Tonight's tale may follow you into your dreams. Subscribe if you haven't already. It helps keep the lights off and the chills on. You ever hear snowfall? Not the sound of your boots crunching through it or wind battering it sideways across your windows. I mean the sound it makes when it's just falling. No wind, no animals, no motion in the trees. Just thick flakes drifting down, and a silence so absolute it hums in your ears. That's how it was at Station K-84, a Soviet-era weather monitoring outpost deep in the Siberian taiga, 200 miles from the nearest village and cut off completely by mid-November. I was one of 5 researchers stationed there last winter, part of a joint climate study between several international agencies. What started as a 6-month rotation turned into something else entirely, and I still don't know how much of it really happened. There's a file on what they think occurred. Officially, the comms array malfunction, solar interference, cabin fever, stress-induced hallucinations. Whatever explanation makes the higher-ups sleep easier. But I remember everything. And if I don't tell it now, I think it'll eat its way out of me. We arrived in early October, before the true freeze. The team was small. Dr. Yelena Morozova, the senior climatologist and Russian lead, Marcus Shaw, a communications engineer from the UK, Ava Gwyn, a glaciologist from Canada, Tomas Delgado, a Chilean field tech, and me, Nathan Bell, atmospheric researcher based out of Anchorage. The station was an old Soviet relic, retooled with modern equipment but still bearing the marks of its Cold War origin: thick concrete walls, rusted bulkhead doors, and utility tunnels snaking beneath it like the veins of a long-dead thing. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was insulated, solar-powered, and stocked with enough supplies to survive off-grid for months. Satellite internet and radio were our lifelines. Slow, but functional. We took turns logging weather data, maintaining sensors, and performing atmospheric balloon launches. Most days were monotonous, even peaceful in their own way, until the first signal came through. It was late November, early dusk, which meant near total darkness by 3 p.m. Marcus had just finished recalibrating the shortwave receiver in the comms room. I was logging wind shear data in the main cabin when he called me over, voice tight. "Hey, Nate, you hearing this?" I walked into the comms room. He'd switched the receiver to an unused frequency, about 9.122 millimeters. A low hiss filled the room. Then, under it, something else. A faint voice, garbled and warped, like it had traveled through miles of broken copper and ice. "Helping anyone here?" We leaned in closer. It repeated, cycling every 40 seconds. The distortion made it hard to place, but it sounded like a woman. Her tone was desperate. We recorded it, played it back, tried to clean it up with software. The timestamp and signal behavior didn't match any known station or distress beacon. Marcus swore it wasn't a loop or prank. Our setup was isolated from external traffic unless manually tuned. Yelena brushed it off. "Could be atmospheric bounce," she said, sipping tea like she didn't care. "Radio signals travel weird in the upper layers during solar flares." She wasn't wrong, but something in her eyes told me she didn't fully believe that either. By early December, the signals were coming more often, always on dead frequencies, always distorted. Sometimes voices, sometimes something else. Clicks, static that almost formed words, or what sounded like Morse code overlaid with sobbing. Tomas picked up what he thought was Spanish one night. He played it back 3 times before he turned pale and shut it off. I asked what it said. He just muttered, "Cosas que no deberíamos. Saber, things we shouldn't know." Then came the night we heard Ava. We were all in the dining hall. Dinner was a grim affair, freeze-dried stew and instant coffee. The air was heavy with tension no one could name. Marcus burst in, pale and shaking, holding his headset. "It's Ava," he said. Ava stared at him. "What?" He looked at her, then the rest of us, like he didn't want to say it. "You were on the signal, your voice, saying things, weird things." We followed him to the comms room. He played it. It was her voice, but slower, breathier, like she was speaking from the bottom of a frozen lake. "I still see the lake. I see what's under it. The face in the ice. It remembers me." Ava backed away, visibly rattled. "I never said that. I don't even know what that means." She hadn't left the station in over a month. There were no outside recordings, no logs, nothing. But it was her. Every inflection, every pause. After that night, no one wanted to be alone in the comms room. The worst part wasn't just the signals, it was what came with them. Dreams. Or something like them. I started waking up with my ears ringing, drenched in sweat, convinced I'd heard someone whispering through the vents. Marcus swore someone was walking the halls at night, long after we'd all gone to bed. Tomas found frost on the inside of his bunk room window, even though the heater had been running non-stop. Elena found claw marks on the wall of the utility tunnel, not deep, but deliberate, arched, like something was trying to write a word it couldn't remember. We chalked it all up to stress, isolation, vitamin D deficiency, cabin fever, until Ava locked herself in the storeroom. We found her the next morning, curled in a ball, humming through her teeth, eyes glassy. She kept whispering, "It's not my voice. It's not me. It's using me." She wouldn't come out for 3 days. On the 4th day, we agreed to shut down the receivers. We couldn't take it anymore. The voices were getting clearer, more specific. Sometimes they repeated things we had said, private thoughts or confessions no one else should have heard. Marcus was the one who initiated the power down sequence. His hands trembled as he pulled the final breaker. The room went quiet. No static, no whispers. Just the hum of the generator and the sound of the snow outside. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the station was breathing again. Until someone spoke through the radio. We hadn't even turned it back on. "Why are you hiding?" It was Marcus's voice, but he hadn't said a word. And the thing that spoke was still talking. We stared at the radio. The power was off. I watched Marcus flip the breakers himself. The red indicator on the receiver's panel wasn't glowing. Nothing was humming. No signal was being processed. But his voice had come through anyway, and it wasn't a recording. It was slower than Marcus's normal cadence. Hollow, like someone trying to mimic a sound without fully understanding what it meant. And it repeated again, almost tenderly. "Why are you hiding?" Then silence. Marcus stepped back from the console like it had bit him. "Tell me one of you is messing with me." None of us answered. We were too busy checking the power panel. Cables, switches. Everything was dead, just as it should have been. Ava finally whispered, "We need to go." "Go where, Ava?" Yelena snapped, but not cruelly, more like a mother terrified of how far her kid might wander. "We're in the middle of the tundra. Storm's due tonight. It's a miracle we haven't lost satellite already." But Ava wasn't listening. She was staring at the speaker, her lips pressed tight like she was trying not to scream. Her eyes were wet. "That wasn't Marcus," she whispered. "Not really." That night, we barricaded the comms room, bolted the door, stacked one of the metal storage shelves against it for good measure. Then we turned off every remaining piece of equipment that could receive signals, emergency radios, backups, even our satellite uplink. We needed to believe the voices couldn't reach us if there was no way to hear them. Of course, we were wrong. The whispers didn't need antennas anymore. They were already in the station. I didn't sleep, not really. At some point past 2 a.m., I started hearing breathing in the hallway. Not footsteps, just the quiet rasp of someone moving past my door, slow and shuffling, like they didn't want to be heard, but couldn't quite hold still. I sat up, pressed my ear to the cold wood, and waited. It passed my door, paused, then kept moving. I wanted to think it was one of the others, maybe Marcus going to the bathroom, or Yelena checking the perimeter. But I knew better. There were no footsteps, just breathing, long, wet, like lungs that hadn't drawn air in years. When I opened my door 5 minutes later, the hallway was empty, but the floor was wet. Damp boot prints leading away from my door down toward the old access hatch to the tunnels. The thing was, none of us wore boots inside the living quarters, and the prints weren't quite human. Too long, too narrow at the toes, as if the person who made them didn't know how feet were supposed to work. Morning came in bruised shades of gray. You couldn't really tell when dawn broke anymore. The sun barely lifted above the horizon before retreating into clouds again. Yelena brewed coffee. It tasted like copper. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept at all. He sat at the dining table, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. He didn't speak until I asked him point blank what was wrong. Then he said something I wish I could unhear. "It knows what I'm afraid of," he whispered. "Last night, I heard my mom, on the other side of the wall. She was singing me a lullaby she used to play on piano. Thing is, she's been dead for 6 years and she never sang it, not once. It was instrumental only." Ava's chair scraped back sharply as she stood. "I'm going down there," she said. "What?" I blinked. "Where?" She pointed. "The tunnels. That thing's coming from under us." Thomas had told us weeks ago that the foundation tunnels were deeper than what the current blueprints showed. Soviet-era bunkers beneath the frost line, sealed off in the early 90s. The hatch near the generator room was supposed to lead to a backup water system, but nobody used it anymore. It had been welded shut, except it wasn't, not anymore. Yelena went to check it last night after the voice incident. Never told us until now. "It's open," she admitted, eyes on the floor. The hatch was cracked, frost on the hinges, like it had been forced outward. We should have stopped Ava. We should have voted, taken precautions, but there was something in the air that morning. A pull, like whatever was underneath had already chosen her. She took a flashlight and crowbar and disappeared down the hatch around 11 o'clock. She never screamed, but at 11:12, we heard her voice come through the emergency radio we hadn't powered back on. "I see it," she whispered. "I was in the hallway when I heard it, every word cold and clear. I see it. It's not sleeping. It's not alone down here." There was a pause, then static, then, almost gently, "Tell them, I'm not coming back." Marcus broke first. He tried to leave the station just after midnight, wrapped in half a dozen layers, pulling his gear sled like he was going to reach the tree line on foot. Yelena and Tomas tackled him before he got through the outer vestibule. He kept screaming about hearing himself talk in his sleep, arguing with someone. Said he woke up with dried blood under his nose and couldn't remember why. Said he saw something crawling across the ceiling when he blinked too fast. That night, I locked my door. Everyone did. And still, I heard my voice outside my room. Just past 3 a.m., a knock. Then, "Hey, it's me. You awake?" Not a whisper, not distorted, perfectly clear. My cadence, my rhythm, like a tape recording. Only thing was, I hadn't moved, and I sure as hell wasn't knocking on my own door. It said it again, softer this time. "Come on, I want to tell you something. I've remembered what it wants." Huh? I didn't open the door, not then, but someone did. Somewhere down the hall, I heard hinges creak, I heard bare feet on the tile, and then I heard nothing at all. The next morning, the hallway felt wrong. You know that feeling when you walk into a room that should be familiar, but something's been moved just enough to make your skin crawl? That's what it felt like stepping out of my bunk. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered softly. The air smelled metallic, sharp, like blood left out too long in snow. Tomas was gone. His bunk was empty, sheets neatly folded, coat still hanging on the hook by his bed. No note, no sign of struggle, just absence. Like he'd stood up and quietly disappeared. I found Marcus in the common room, knees tucked to his chest, eyes red-rimmed. He didn't even look up when I came in. He opened his door. He said softly, "Last night." I heard it. I nodded slowly. I already knew. I'd heard it too. Yelena took charge. She was the oldest of us, nearly 50, pragmatic to a fault, and colder than the ice outside when she needed to be. But I could tell even she was cracking around the edges. "We assume containment breach," she said, pacing in front of the whiteboard where we once tracked weather patterns. "Not viral, not environmental, psychological perhaps, or technological." She looked at me. "Whatever's mimicking us, whether it's artificial or organic, it's inside the station. We treat it like a hostile." That's when Marcus said it, quietly, almost apologetically. "It's not just mimicking." We all turned to him. "It's learning. It doesn't just copy what we say, it understands. It's adapting, choosing what to say to get under our skin." No one spoke for a long time. Outside, the wind began to pick up, brushing powdery snow across the sealed windows. The temperature was dropping, hard. We decided to do one last sweep of the tunnels. The hatch hadn't been touched since Ava went down. We hadn't dared. But if Tomas had vanished, there was only one logical place he could have gone, or been taken. Yelena led the way, her breath visible even in the supposedly heated corridor. I followed with Marcus. We all carried flashlights, crowbars, and radios. Even though the radios had started picking up stray whispers again the past few days, we kept them close. It felt safer to hear something than nothing. The tunnel was darker than I expected. It descended in a slow spiral, old concrete steps slick with frost. Soviet signage still lined the walls, half-faded Cyrillic warnings that translated roughly to things like, "No entry without authorization. Seal before exiting. The door does not open both ways." We reached the bottom in about 3 minutes. The flashlight beam caught a rusted door, weld lines along the frame, sloppy, jagged, as if someone tried sealing it after the fact. I could see deep scratches around the handle, fresh. Something had opened it from inside. Marcus pulled it open with effort. The door groaned like a dying animal. Cold air whooshed out, heavy with the stink of damp earth and something else, like burnt plastic and rot. The flashlight barely cut the dark. The room beyond was massive, industrial, rows of decommissioned server racks, ancient Soviet computers, some still flashing with red diodes despite the apparent lack of power. Cables hung from the ceiling like tangled veins. And in the middle, something impossible. A chair. Metal, old, bolted to the floor, surrounded by outdated biometric equipment and audio monitoring devices. Above it, hanging from a track in the ceiling, was a helmet. Round, opaque, wires fed into it from every direction. The inside was smeared with dry blood. "This is a listening post," Yelena whispered. "But for what?" Marcus was staring at the back wall. His flashlight had landed on something scrawled across it in smeared red. "Poslushai Sebia." Listen to yourself. Then the voices started again, but not from our radios, from the room itself. They came out of the old speakers along the walls, raspy, uneven, a cacophony of us, our voices all overlapping, distorted. Violeta screaming in Russian, Marcus whispering apologies, me laughing. Ava humming that same 4-note tune she'd always tap nervously with her fingers. Even Tomas muttering something in Spanish over and over again. Abajo, abajo, abajo. Down, down, down. I spun, disoriented. It was like being trapped inside a memory that wasn't mine. And then my flashlight flickered and revealed Ava, or something that looked like her. She stood just behind the chair, but she wasn't breathing. She didn't blink. Her skin was pale, stretched. Her eyes looked glassy, like she was still underwater. Her mouth moved, but the voice came from behind me. "It can use us now." Marcus stumbled back. I grabbed his arm, yanked him toward the exit. Yelena was already running, not even trying to hide the fear on her face. We slammed the hatch shut behind us, welded it, sealed it, anything to keep that thing or what it had become from following us back up. We thought we were safe, but when we got back to the main hall, the power was out. Not just flickering, dead. And written in frost across the inside of the window, letters etched with a finger from the inside, was a message we hadn't seen before. Just one word, stay. For a long time, none of us spoke. We just stood there, our breath fogging in the frigid air, staring at the frost-scrawled message on the window. Stay. It wasn't a suggestion. It didn't feel like a warning either. It felt like a command. Marcus was the first to move. He crossed the room, grabbed a rag from the supply shelf and wiped the word away, but it didn't smear like regular condensation. The letters peeled off like they'd been carved deep into the glass. He ran his fingers over them afterward, silently, then shook his head. Nothing on the outside, he whispered. It's all from in here. Yelena checked the generator room. The panel was intact, but the main power lines had been cut, severed clean through, not chewed, not worn down by ice, sliced surgically, like by someone who knew what they were doing. That ruled out an accident. We were being sabotaged. And worse, someone or something wanted us to stay. We rationed the batteries and switched to emergency heaters, but the cold was creeping in. The insulation couldn't hold forever, not in a place like this. Yelena drew up a plan. Repair the power lines if we could, otherwise prep the snowmobiles and head for the nearest outpost by sled, a desperate 2-day journey through open tundra. Risky, but staying seemed worse. It was only after we'd packed that Marcus pulled me aside. Something's off with Yelena, he whispered. She hasn't blinked in over 5 minutes. I frowned. She's under pressure, like all of us. No, he shook his head. I watched her talk to herself in the mirror this morning. I mean talk, like there were 2 people in there. The reflection didn't match her mouth. I didn't know what to say, because deep down, I'd been seeing it too. Little things. Yelena's voice didn't quite match the way it used to rasp around the edges. She was colder now, and sometimes, when she didn't know we were looking, her mouth would hang open like she was listening to something, waiting for it. That night, I dreamed of Ava again. She stood in the hallway just outside my door, her skin the wrong shade, like freezer burn. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and when she spoke, it sounded like me, my voice, pitch perfect. You already let it in, she said. I woke up to whispering. Not in the hallway this time, but inside the room. The corners were dark, the lights had dimmed to a faint pulse, battery backup struggling. The whispering didn't stop when I sat up. It just got clearer. We see what you see. Remember what you forgot. We are already inside. I grabbed the emergency light and swept the room. No one there, but my mirror was fogged up, and across it, traced in the condensation by some invisible hand, was the phrase, "We're the skin." I didn't sleep after that. We were set to leave at first light. Yelena was waiting by the garage doors, snowmobile packs loaded, windshields already brushed clear of frost. She moved mechanically, efficiently, too efficient. Marcus and I exchanged a glance as we approached. Something felt off. You sleep at all? I asked her. She turned her head slowly, eyes settling on me like weights. Sleep is inefficient. It was subtle, but that wasn't Yelena's voice. Not entirely. Her tone was clipped, perfectly neutral, like she was reading from a script. Marcus stepped back. We're not going, he muttered. Yelena tilted her head. But we must, she said. That's the directive. Not plan, not decision. That's when Marcus bolted. He didn't make it more than 10 steps before Yelena tackled him. No, something wearing Yelena's skin tackled him. Her strength was unnatural, her movements jerky and imprecise, I heard his ribs crack under her knee as she pinned him, fingers digging into his face, trying to pry open his mouth. I acted without thinking, grabbed the nearest wrench and brought it down across her back. She didn't flinch, didn't scream, didn't even bleed, but she did turn. And when she looked at me, her eyes weren't eyes anymore. They were hollow, too deep, like looking into a tunnel that went on forever. She opened her mouth, and from somewhere deep inside her chest came a chorus of voices. Ours. All of ours. They spoke in unison. We've already left. What you see is just the hollow. Then she collapsed, right there on the floor. Her body spasmed once, then went limp. Yelena was gone. The thing wearing her was dead, or done with the charade. Marcus was bleeding badly. His shoulder was dislocated. He kept mumbling Ava's name over and over again as I dragged him into the common room and barred the door behind us. We weren't leaving anymore, not through the tunnels, not by sled. We were going to freeze in this place, or worse, vanish, like the others. And as I sat there beside him, wrapping his wound, I heard it again. That same voice from the very beginning. My voice. From the emergency radio, even though it was off. Why are you hiding? I didn't answer the voice. I couldn't. My throat was tight, frozen shut with fear. The radio wasn't even plugged in, but it whispered anyway, like it was breathing, and it had my voice. Not just the sound of it, but the rhythm, the pause between thoughts, the quiet panic hidden behind forced calm. It knew me. Marcus stirred beside me, pale and shivering. His lips were cracked, his breath shallow. I'd done what I could for his shoulder, but it wasn't enough. We were running out of warmth, supplies, and people. I kept thinking of that last thing, the thing in Yelena's body had said. We've already left. What you see is just the hollow. Did that mean Yelena had been gone long before she attacked Marcus? Was she already hollow when we first climbed out of the tunnels? Was Ava? I reached for attention, but there was none. Was I? The whispers started up again around 3 o'clock AM. They weren't coming from the radio this time. They came from the vents, the floors, the walls. Voices sliding through the infrastructure like a cold wind, like the place itself had become porous, soaked through with memory and mimicry. They were having conversations now, with each other, with our voices. One version of Marcus, laughing nervously, like he used to after making one of his bad puns. Another of Yelena, cold and commanding, Ava humming that little melody, Tomas muttering prayers under his breath. And me, so many me's, arguing, pleading, whispering in different emotional registers. I sat in the dark, flashlight off, and just listened. Do you remember the frostbite in 3rd grade? Tell them about the dog, the river, the scream that didn't stop. They're all inside now, even the real ones. And then, clear as day, a final voice. New. Soon we won't need the station. We'll have the signal. I knew then it wasn't the cold that was killing us. It was broadcast. This station had been built to listen. Soviet-era tech, all rigged to monitor frequencies from outside the standard bands. But what if it hadn't been about intercepting enemy messages? What if it had been about containment? About keeping something trapped down in the tunnels, behind all that concrete and warning signage? The chair, the helmet, the wet wiring, and the walls that echoed with our voices. What if the Soviets had caught a fragment of something non-human and tried to interrogate it? And what if, over decades, it had learned to use what it heard, to copy, to become? I turned to Marcus. He was staring at the door now, unblinking. Marcus, I said quietly, don't listen to it. His mouth twitched. Listen to what? He asked, in a voice that wasn't his. I should have run. I should have grabbed my parka, forced the emergency hatch, taken my chances in the snow. But I didn't. Instead, I backed away slowly, heart pounding. That thing Whatever it was inside Marcus just sat there, smiling faintly, like it had finally grown comfortable in its new skin. "It's quieter now," it said. "I don't think so," I muttered, hand tightening on the wrench still tucked into my coat. "No," it said again. "In here." It tapped Marcus's chest. Less noise, less doubt. He was full of contradictions, guilt. I erased them. "Where's the real Marcus?" It tilted its head. "Real? If you mean the one who felt sorry for leaving Ava behind. He's gone, just like the rest." I don't remember deciding to swing the wrench. I just remember it making a thick, wet sound when it connected with the side of Marcus's head. He dropped like a marionette with its strings cut, and when he hit the floor, the whispering in the walls stopped. For a moment, the silence was the loudest thing in the world. I didn't bury him. I couldn't. Ground was frozen, and it didn't feel right. I dragged his body to the airlock, opened the outer hatch, and watched the wind take him, tumbling faceless into the endless white. And I stood there for a long time, staring into the void of the snowstorm, wondering how much of him had been left by the time I let him go, wondering how much of me was left now. It's just me here now. The power flickers sometimes, but I don't bother turning anything back on. I sit in silence. I don't speak, not even to myself, because I know it's still listening. Every word spoken is another invitation, another crack in the armor. So I keep quiet. I don't think too loud. I've learned to feel small, like prey. But tonight, I heard something new, not a whisper, not a copy, a scream from deep below the floorboards. So raw, so human it made my stomach twist. It sounded like me, and then, just now, the printer in the back room whirred to life. It hasn't worked in weeks, no power, no connection, but it's printing something. I don't want to look. I really don't, but I will, because I have to know what part of me it's stolen this time. The printer clicked and whirred like it was choking. Dust flurried from its vents as the first page rolled out, curling slightly at the edge. I waited, heart hammering, as a second page followed, then a third. 3 pages, each one perfectly clean, margins aligned, printed in dark, crisp ink. I approached them like they might burn me. The first was a transcript, my voice, word for word. A full record of everything I'd said since I arrived here, every throwaway comment, every strained conversation, even the things I whispered to myself in the dark. Things I shouldn't even remember saying. I turned to the second page. It was the same transcript, only this time rewritten. Not my exact words, but what I meant. The ugly truth beneath the dialogue. Regret, guilt, loneliness so deep it bordered on madness. My worst fears printed out in neat, impersonal courier font. By the time I reached the third page, my hands were shaking. This one was different. No timestamps, no formatting. Just a single line repeated over and over until the page bled with it. "You are not the original." I don't know how long I stared at that page. I felt something break inside me, like ice cracking beneath my feet. I tried to speak, to say, "No, I remember my life. I know who I am." But the words didn't come out right. They caught on something in my throat, warped, midair like radio static. A second voice finished the sentence for me, whispering from behind the walls. I know who I was. That's when I stopped fighting it. I've sealed off the rooms, the tunnels, the vents. I've ripped the wiring out of the floorboards, smashed the mirror, killed the lights. The cold presses in harder each night, but I don't light a fire. I don't speak anymore. I'm not sure it matters. Because the signal is still here, still transmitting. Even when everything is dead, the antenna pulses faintly, some silent rhythm on a frequency no human ear was meant to receive. I thought I was resisting it, fighting back. But sometimes, in the silence, I hear something comforting, a hum, almost like a heartbeat. And I find myself pressing my hand to the wall, just to feel it. Today I woke up with blood on my shirt. It wasn't mine. And on the floor where the printer used to be was a fresh page. I'm left, then you're free. I don't know what that means, but I know what it wants me to think it means. One body left to hollow, one voice left to mimic, one last face to wear, and then it's free to leave. There's a mirror in the garage, one we never used. I stood in front of it today just to check. To be sure, the man in the mirror looked like me. Same dark circles, same ragged parka, same frostbitten lip I bit open on day 3, but something was wrong with his eyes. They were too calm, too still, and I swear to God, when I blinked, he didn't. If anyone finds this story, this record, whatever the hell it's become, don't come here, don't try to help. Burn the station to the ground, take down the antenna, crush every hard drive and tear out every wire. And if you hear your own voice on the radio, especially if it tells you something only you would know, don't answer. Not even once, because if you do, you might never stop. That wraps up tonight's pasta. If your lights flicker, don't blame the wiring until the next shadow creeps in. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It helps more than you know. And if you liked the story, don't forget to hit the like button. In the comments below, share your own horror experience. I'll be reading after midnight. Good night. See you again tomorrow.